I noticed a few comments asking for a Power Girl story in the boys' universe. The problem is, there are multiple versions of Power Girl, and none of the comments specified which one they meant, so I decided to go with the post-crisis Earth 2 version. It's the most iconic and one of the most powerful versions of Power Girl, which means Homelander is about to have a very, very bad day.
The first thing she noticed was the smell. Not the garbage rotting in the July heat, though there was plenty of that. Not the exhaust layered into the concrete after decades of traffic that never really stopped. It was something underneath all of it, something chemical and faint, like a cleaning product applied to a surface that wasn't supposed to need cleaning. Karen had encountered that smell before in places where powerful people tried to make bad things disappear. She had a talent for noticing what wasn't supposed to be noticed. She stood on a rooftop 12 stories above 9th Avenue and watched the street below organize itself into a performance. 3 emergency vehicles were parked at angles that looked urgent, but weren't. Their lights strobed red and white across the faces of a crowd, held back by barriers that had gone up faster than the paramedics had moved. A man in a suit, not a first responder, not any kind of city official, something else entirely, was speaking into a headset near the perimeter, and whatever he was saying made 2 camera operators shift their positions in unison. The adjustment was subtle. Most people wouldn't catch it. Karen caught it. There was a collapsed section of scaffolding on the sidewalk outside a mid-rise office building. Real collapse, real metal, real weight, she could see that much. What she couldn't see anywhere in that neat and well-lit staging area was urgency. The paramedics moved with the careful choreography of people who already knew the outcome. Nobody was running. Nobody was shouting. A woman in a yellow hard hat stood near the rubble with her arms crossed and her eyes on her phone. 2 people were still under that scaffolding. Karen could hear their heartbeats from where she stood. One was strong and steady. The other was not. She also heard the conversation the man in the suit was having. She didn't need to strain for it. Her hearing reached down through 12 floors of ambient noise and pulled his words out clean. We need at least 4 more minutes for the B-roll. Tell Redline he can start the extraction on my count. And there, at the far edge of the onlookers, half hidden by a news van's satellite arm, a man in a red and black bodysuit, broad-shouldered arms folded, waiting for his cue like an actor who'd done this scene before. Karen exhaled through her nose. She had arrived in this city roughly 6 hours ago, dropping out of the upper atmosphere somewhere over the Hudson with no destination and no plan beyond orientation. The crossing had been accidental. The kind of dimensional fracture that happens sometimes in the spaces between certain energies, and she'd landed on the roof of a parking structure in Weehawken, taken stock of the skyline, and decided the city across the water was worth a closer look before she attempted anything else. 6 hours of observation had told her several things. The soups here were known. They were managed. They were advertised on the sides of buses and sold in cereal box promotions and discussed on morning talk shows with the same breathless sincerity reserved for award show nominees. They had logos. Some of them had agents. She had watched 3 separate incidents in those 6 hours. A fire in Midtown that a soup had arrived at 11 minutes after the first responders in time for the cameras. But not the worst of it. A mugging in Hell's Kitchen, handled by a soup named Shockwave, whose involvement had generated 17 social media posts in under 4 minutes, most of them from the same 3 accounts. And now this, a construction accident being held in place like a prop, while someone counted down to the hero shot. The heartbeat that wasn't steady had gotten quieter. Karen stepped off the rooftop. She didn't announce herself. She came down fast and landed on the near side of the barrier with enough force to crack the asphalt in a 6-inch radius around her boots, which parted the bystanders without her having to ask. The man in the suit turned. The camera operators turned. Redline, still waiting for his cue at the edge of the van, straightened up. She walked past all of them to the rubble. The scaffolding was steel pipe and wooden planking folded in at the middle where a joint had failed. 2 people underneath a construction worker in his 40s and a teenage girl who had been walking past at exactly the wrong moment. Karen crouched, got her hands under the heaviest section, and lifted it clear in one motion. She set it aside without ceremony. It hit the pavement 10 feet away and made a sound like a small car crash. The construction worker had a broken collarbone and a cut above his eye. The girl had a head injury that needed a hospital right now, not in 4 minutes. Karen looked up at the nearest medic who was staring at her. She needs a key collar and a backboard. You have both. Use them. The medic moved. The man in the suit had crossed the perimeter and was now standing 3 feet behind her headset. In his hand, his expression doing something complicated between professional courtesy and genuine alarm. He was mid-40s, silver at the temples, the kind of face that had learned to stay arranged under a wide variety of pressures. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to—" "No," Karen said. She stood. She was taller than him by several inches and didn't adjust her posture to make that less apparent. "Whatever you were going to say, no." He recalibrated. "We have a licensed response team on site. For liability reasons, unauthorized." The licensed response team was waiting for a camera count. She said it the same way she'd have said the sky is overcast, just a thing that was true. The girl had 4 minutes before the pressure on her skull became a different kind of problem. You understand what I'm telling you? He understood. She could tell because his face went from professionally pleasant to professionally blank, which was the version people wore when they needed to stop reacting and start calculating. Behind him, Redline had moved away from the news van. He was big, close to 6'4", with the build that came from something other than a gym. He stopped about 15 feet back, shoulders loose, not quite a fighting stance, but not nothing either. Waiting to see how this read on camera before he decided what to do next. Karen glanced at him. 1 beat. He stayed where he was. She turned back to the scene. The emergency crew was working now, actually working with the speed and focus they'd been holding in reserve. Someone in the crowd had a phone up. Then 2 people. Then a dozen. She didn't perform for them. She checked the construction worker's pulse, confirmed the collarbone told him to keep still. She answered 2 questions from the medical team. She stepped back when the gurney arrived. The whole thing took 6 minutes. When she rose and turned, the man in the suit was still there. Standing just behind his right shoulder was a woman who had been there longer than he had. Karen had clocked her stepping out of an unmarked SUV 2 minutes after the landing, moving to a position just outside the active perimeter with the practiced patience of someone who worked cleanup, not crisis. Late 30s, expensive Blazer tablet in hand. She looked at Karen the way an engineer looks at a structural anomaly. Interested. Already measuring load-bearing capacity. That was impressive, the woman said. Not a compliment, an assessment. It was basic, Karen said. We don't get a lot of basic around here. The woman held out a card. White minimal, 1 phone number, and a logo Karen didn't recognize, a stylized V, clean and corporate. My name is Ashley Barrett. I work for an organization that handles... I know what the card is for. Karen didn't take it. I'm not interested. She left it in Ashley's outstretched hand and walked back through the parted bystanders. Nobody stopped her. Redline tracked her movement, but made no play. She walked 2 blocks south, turned east, and when she was clear of the cameras, she went straight up. The city spread out below her, dense and bright and loud, in the particular way of places that had learned to turn their own disorder into a product. She'd moved through complicated systems before ones that took time to map properly. This one had a specific quality to it. something she needed more information to name. She found a water tower on a building in Chelsea and sat on its access platform with her back against the tank and her attention on the skyline. Not resting, processing. The card, the suit, the camera count, the soup standing by for his mark, all of it connected to that V logo. The 6 hours of observation had confirmed a pattern. Now she had enough to start pulling threads. She didn't have to wait long. 4 hours later, following a cluster of police frequencies spiking unusual activity in Washington Heights, she found the other thing. A neighborhood in the specific kind of poverty that builds up in layers, years of being managed down rather than invested in, visible in every boarded window, and every cracked facade that nobody had filed permits to repair. 4 blocks cordoned with unmarked temporary fencing, 3 vehicles without plates, and a team of Soup's lower-tier faces she didn't know yet, moving through the streets with the systematic ease of people running a familiar operation. She saw them drag a man out of a storefront by his collar. Saw them put a woman's face against a parked car because she'd been recording on her phone. Saw a kid, 16, maybe break for the corner, get caught by the ankle, hit the pavement. No cameras, no suited handlers timing the B-roll, no staged lighting. Karen was already moving before the kid stopped sliding. She didn't circle the block. She dropped straight into the street between the team and the boy, on the ground closer and faster than the first intervention, the crack of landing hard enough to make 2 of the Soups flinch back before they'd even registered what had arrived. One of them, short hair electricity running along both forearms, didn't flinch. "Back off. This is a licensed operation under no," Karen said. 3rd time that night. Same temperature as the first 2. What followed was brief. The kind of brief that happens when one side has read the situation correctly, and the other keeps insisting on a different read, right up until the point they lose the ability to insist on anything. She put 4 of them down, with calibrated deliberate force enough to stop, not enough to permanently damage. The 5th read the room correctly and ran. She let him go. She crouched next to the kid who was 16, had a scraped knee, and was looking at her like she'd fallen through the ceiling of the world, which technically was not inaccurate. "Anything else hurt?" she asked. He shook his head. "Go home." He went. She stood alone in the empty block and listened to the city resume around the edges of it, traffic 3 streets over, a window opening above her, someone's television bleeding through a wall. Somewhere very close, a phone was replaying footage on loop. She could hear the tiny speaker cycling through the same 8 seconds again and again. She felt nothing particular about being recorded. She felt a great deal about the kid's face, about the systematic patience of that operation, about the woman whose cheekbone had met the car door, while the city's official response teams were 6 miles away, staging B-roll. That she felt clearly enough. She went back to the rooftops. There was too much of this city left to understand, and she'd confirmed enough tonight to know that patience had a hard expiration date here. By morning, the video was everywhere. The video ran for 11 seconds. 11 seconds of a woman in a white bodysuit dropping out of the dark above a Washington Heights street, hitting the pavement hard enough to split it, and dismantling a 6-person response team with the unhurried efficiency of someone clearing a table. The audio was poor wind. Distant traffic, someone nearby breathing fast, but the images were sharp enough. Sharp enough to see the moment the last operative went down. Sharp enough to see her crouch next to the teenager on the ground and say something short before he got up and walked away. By 6 in the morning, it had 40 million views. By 8, it had 112. By 9, 3 separate cable news programs were running split-screen segments, pairing the footage with emergency expert panels. 2 senators had issued statements, and the phrase, unauthorized, superpowered individual had been coined, deployed, and was already being used as both a warning and a rallying cry depending on which channel you were watching. Karen watched all of it from the same Chelsea rooftop, her back against the water tower, a stolen newspaper folded across one knee. She wasn't reading the newspaper. She was listening to 17 simultaneous broadcast frequencies and watching the narrative calcify in real time. The scaffolding collapse had been reframed by morning. According to 3 outlets that Karen had now identified as downstream of the same publicist, the licensed response team had been moments away from completing a textbook extraction when an unknown individual had intervened, compromising a carefully coordinated operation and putting both victims at elevated risk. One expert, a man with impressive credentials, displayed in a lower third banner, spent 4 minutes explaining the liability implications of unsanctioned, superpowered involvement in active rescue scenarios. He did not mention the camera count. Nobody mentioned the camera count. The Washington Heights footage was being handled differently, which told her something useful about how the system sorted its problems. The scaffolding incident had witnesses daylight and a corporate handler already on the ground. Washington Heights had one phone bad lighting and no prepared response. So the scaffolding incident got the reframing treatment concern coordination liability, while Washington Heights got the silence treatment. Nothing. Not a clip, not a denial, not a single lower third banner. The silence was louder than the coverage. She folded the newspaper and set it down. Somewhere below, a food cart was opening for the morning, and the smell of coffee drifted up through 7 stories of brick and steel. She hadn't slept. She didn't particularly need to, not after one night. But she noticed the absence the way you notice when a background noise stops a small gap in the rhythm of things. Her phone rang. She had acquired the phone the previous afternoon from an electronics shop in Midtown, paid cash, gave a false name, said nothing memorable. The number had been provided to exactly one person. A contact she'd established through a chain of 3 intermediaries before the sun went down. She had been thorough. She picked up. Ms. Starr. Ashley Barrett's voice was the same as it had been at the perimeter the night before. Measured professional, carrying the faint warmth of someone trained to sound like they were doing you a favor. I appreciate you taking my call. I'm listening, Karen said. Not I'm glad you called. Not how did you get this number. Just the facts of the situation. Last night was remarkable. What you did, both incidents, the public response has been extraordinary. People are responding to you in a way we haven't seen in years. What you represent the idea of, what do you want from me specifically? Karen said. Not the version for press releases. The actual version? A pause. Not long. Ashley was too good for long pauses, but present. We want to work with you, formally, with full resource support, legal infrastructure, a platform that lets you operate at the scale your abilities warrant. We're not asking you to become something you're not. We're asking you to let us make sure the right people know who you are and what you stand for. Karen looked out at the skyline. A news helicopter was making a slow arc 3 miles northeast, probably circling whatever the morning's designated story was. You want to put a logo on me? She said. We want to ensure that your presence in this city, which is already significant, public serves the greatest possible good. Without structure, you want to control the definition, Karen said. Before I control it myself. You want to be the people who introduce me, so that when I do something you don't like, you're already the authority on what I am. She said it without heat, the same way she'd have described the weather. That's not a partnership offer. That's a preemption strategy. The pause this time was a fraction longer. I think that's a very uncharitable reading of... It's an accurate reading, Karen said. I'm going to decline. If anything changes on my end, I'll let you know." She ended the call, set the phone down on the ledge beside her, and went back to listening to the city. She gave it 40 minutes. In those 40 minutes, a think piece appeared on a major digital outlet under the byline of a national security analyst. The kind of byline that suggested government adjacency without confirming it, raising concerns about the psychological profile of individuals who intervene in superpowered incidents without registration training or accountability. The piece used the phrase escalation risk 7 times. It was very well written. It had clearly not been written that morning, so they kept 2 tracks running simultaneously. She'd expected that. What she hadn't expected was how fast the second track went live after she'd turned down the first one. The call and the piece were maybe 25 minutes apart. Someone had written that piece before Ashley dialed. She filed that away. The morning deepened. She shifted locations twice. Not from any specific threat, but from habit. Staying in one place too long made you a fixed point, and fixed points were easy to surveil. She went east to a roof above a hardware store on 125th, then north to the ledge of a 12-story residential building, where the air smelled like someone had been grilling on the 6th floor. From each location, she listened, updated her picture of what this city's power structure actually looked like beneath the version it put on television. It looked like a circulatory system. Vought at the center, pumping money and narrative out through media partnerships, government contracts, municipal agreements, insurance frameworks, and what appeared to be a genuinely impressive network of people who owed things to each other in ways that didn't get written down. The soups were the visible surface of it, the part the public touched, but the mechanism underneath was older and less photogenic. She was still working through the shape of it when the note appeared. Not a phone call this time. An actual note folded into a grimy square and weighted under the edge of a loose brick on the residential ledge she'd moved to the paper was wrinkled at one corner. Faintly greased, the kind of thing written in a hurry on whatever was available. Someone had been on this roof before she arrived, had anticipated where she'd go, and had been patient enough to leave it without making contact. That patience, she noted, was its own kind of message. She unfolded it. You turned down the wrong people for the wrong reason. There are worse reasons in this city. Buy yourself a coffee, not from the cart on 9th. They've got a Vought vendor contract, and think about whether you want to know what's actually in their filing cabinets. If yes, 14 Fletcher Street basement level tonight. Come alone. Don't fly, they've got radar coverage 3 blocks north of there. The handwriting was fast and slightly uneven, the kind that came from someone who wrote left-handed or who drafted this on something that wasn't a flat surface. No signature. The ink smelled faintly of a cheap ballpoint run nearly dry. She read it twice, put it in her pocket, and thought about it the way she thought about most things, not with urgency, but with attention. The note was useful in several directions at once. Whoever wrote it knew her location, knew her movement pattern, knew enough about Vaught's infrastructure to warn her off a specific coffee cart and identify a radar gap. That was a significant amount of operational intelligence for what was nominally an anonymous tip. It was also, and this was the part that made her more cautious rather than less written, in a way designed to appeal specifically to her stated rejection of Vought. You turned down the wrong people. That was flattery dressed as provocation, an attempt to position the writer as more legitimate than the thing she'd already refused. She didn't go that evening. She went the following night, having spent the intervening 36 hours running 3 different surveillance passes on Fletcher Street from varying altitudes and confirming, among other things, that the radar gap in the note was accurate, that the basement entrance was real, and that the building had been accessed by 4 different people over 2 days, using no pattern she could attribute to normal occupation. She landed 2 blocks away and walked. The basement smelled like mildew and takeout containers, and the particular human smell of people who spent a lot of time somewhere they'd rather not be. Strip lighting, a folding table, 3 monitors running security feeds. A large man with dark hair and a scar cutting through his left eyebrow was sitting with his boots up on the table edge, eating something out of a paper bag, watching her come through the door with the expression of a man who'd placed a bet and was waiting to see if he'd won. "Karen Starr," he said. It wasn't a question. He had a British accent ground down by years somewhere else, not quite erased. "Heard about you." "From where?" she said. "From the 11 seconds of you batting Vaught's little enforcement squad around Washington Heights, like you were bored." He lowered his boots from the table and straightened up, not standing, just shifting like he was considering his options. "William Butcher. Billy, if you're the forgiving type, which I'm guessing you're not." "What do you want, Billy?" He smiled at that. Not warmly. "Get right to it, do you? All right." He reached across the table and slid a manila folder toward her without getting up. "Have a look at that, and tell me if you're still planning to fly home." She didn't reach for it. "Tell me what's in it." "Kids," he said. The smile went somewhere else. Ones Vaught got hold of before their parents knew what was happening. Compound 5 trials. Some of them made it through, some of them didn't. All of them got buried in files that don't officially exist. He nodded at the folder. "This is the ones that didn't make it. This is what your new friends have been doing with their filing cabinets." She picked up the folder. The contents were what he'd said they were. Dates, ages, medical notations written in the particular dry language of people who needed distance from what they were recording. Photographs she looked at once and didn't look away from because looking away would have been a performance, and she didn't perform. She set it back on the table. "How many people know about this?" she said. "The right people, none. The wrong people, plenty." He leaned back, watching her. "I've been at this a while. I know what the system looks like from the inside, and I know what it takes to damage it. What I don't have." He gestured a loose, open-handed thing. "Is someone who can walk through a wall Vaught built and not notice the wall. You want to use me. Everyone in this city wants to use you, love. Difference is I'm honest about it." He pulled the paper bag back toward himself. "Also, I'm trying to bring down the people who did that." He nodded at the folder. "Which I figured might matter to you given the last 48 hours. She looked at him. He held the look without flinching, which was either courage or practice, probably both. "You have more files than this," she said. "Considerably more. And you've been collecting them how long?" "Long enough to know this doesn't end by punching the right person," he said. "And long enough to know punching is sometimes part of it anyway." He said it evenly, the way someone talks about a tool they've used before and aren't bothered about using again. Not bragging, just stating the inventory. She wasn't going to trust him. That much was clear before she'd walked through the door, and nothing in the last 10 minutes had adjusted it. He was useful in the same way a detailed map of a minefield was useful, valuable, necessary, and something you'd be a fool to handle carelessly. "I'm not joining anything," she said. "You don't point me at targets. And when I make a call you disagree with, you don't get a veto." "Didn't say you were." "I want access to what you have. In exchange, I'll share what I find. No veto on each other's decisions." He looked at her for a moment. "You're tougher to negotiate with than most governments." "Yes," she said. "Do we have an arrangement or not?" "We have something." He held out his hand. She shook it once, let go, and turned for the door. Behind her, she heard him say mostly to himself, "Christ, she doesn't even want a coffee." She stopped at the threshold. "Fletcher Street," she said without turning around. The note said the cart on 9th has a Vought vendor contract. What about the one on Fletcher? A pause. Then something that might have been respect working its way through the sarcasm. Fletcher's clean. Good. She left. Outside the city ran its usual voltage sirens 3 blocks north, a train somewhere underground, the specific flatness of 2 in the morning, pressing down on all the noise that refused to stop. She walked back toward the open sky, going over the shape of what she'd just agreed to and what she hadn't. The files were real. The kids were real. Vought had been running that operation for years, and the apparatus that allowed them to run it was still entirely intact. She thought about Ashley Barrett's voice on the phone that morning. The careful warmth of it, the way every sentence had been built to close a distance without actually closing anything. She thought about the think piece that had appeared 25 minutes after she'd said no. She thought about the folder on the table and the photograph on page 4. She went straight up when she hit the alley at the end of Fletcher Street, rising fast into the cold above the rooflines, and stayed up there for a while, thinking. She had come into this city without a plan. She had one now, or the beginning of one. It was not a comfortable thing to have. 14 floors above Rockefeller Center, John Homelander stood at the window of a corner office that technically belonged to someone else and looked out at a city that had belonged in every way that mattered to him. He had watched the 11-second clip 4 times. Then a 5th slowed down frame by frame on the last 3 seconds. He'd watched it the same way you watch something that doesn't fit the categories you have for things, with the tight, specific attention of a person trying to locate the flaw. The edit, the rational explanation. There was no flaw. The clip was clean. The woman hit the ground, moved through 6 trained operatives like they were furniture, and walked away without looking at anything except the kid on the pavement. She hadn't looked at the recording device. She hadn't looked at the sky the way Soups almost always did when they were performing flight, that small, upward glance, barely conscious, checking the angle, checking what the shot would be. She hadn't done anything that indicated she knew or cared that anyone was watching. He'd watched the clip a 6th time, looking specifically for that glance. It wasn't there. That was the thing that sat wrong. Every person he had ever encountered with real power knew at some level that they were being watched. They calibrated to it. They worked with it or against it, but they registered it. This woman had moved through that street the way you move through an empty room. No performance, no posturing, nothing adjusted for the observer, like the observer wasn't a factor worth accounting for. His phone buzzed. Ashley. He didn't answer it. Whatever she wanted to tell him, he already knew the shape of it. They were going to propose a response, a strategy, a narrative around the unknown individual that positioned Vought as the responsible party managing an emerging situation. They were very good at that. He put the phone face down on the windowsill and kept looking at the city. He had told her to turn down the offer, not out loud. He'd never told Ashley anything out loud that he couldn't afford to have repeated. But he'd made his position clear through the channels that existed for making things clear without leaving records. The woman in white didn't need a Vought platform. She didn't need to be managed. She needed to understand quickly and without ambiguity that there was one person in this city who stood at the top of what was possible, and that positioning was not negotiable. He'd know soon enough whether she understood that. The city below him moved through its night, indifferent to what was being decided above it. He watched the lights and thought about the 11-second clip and about the specific moment he'd counted it 3 seconds in, where one of the operatives had thrown a full-force strike at the woman's midsection, and she had not moved, not braced, not absorbed, just not moved the way a building doesn't move when you push it. He was not concerned. He told himself this clearly because clarity was important. He was not concerned. He picked up the phone and called Ashley back. The files ran to 431 pages. Karen had gone through all of them, in the hours between leaving Fletcher Street and the first gray edge of dawn, sitting on a different rooftop than her usual Chelsea perch, a condemned printing building in Bushwick, whose top floor still smelled of ink and machine oil, which she found preferable to the options. She read the way she did most things fast, with full retention, nothing skimmed. By the time the sky went from black to the particular iron gray that preceded actual daylight, she had a working picture of what Vought had been building underneath its public-facing infrastructure for the better part of 2 decades. It was not a picture she would have invented if asked to imagine the worst. The Compound 5 trials were the frame of it, the spine that everything else connected to. The substance itself was not new to her. Butcher had established that in broad strokes the night before. What the files added was granularity. Ages, dosages, outcomes sorted into columns. There were children in those columns who had been dosed before their second birthday, administered through what the internal documentation called voluntary parental consent programs. A phrase that appeared 47 times across 6 separate operational divisions, and meant in practice that parents had been told their children were receiving enhanced nutrition supplements as part of a longitudinal health study. Some of those children had developed abilities. Some had developed complications. The files used the word complications for both categories, with different follow-up protocols attached. The follow-up protocols for the second category were brief. She put the folder down on the concrete beside her and looked at the skyline for a while without seeing it. Not processing, not formulating. Just giving herself the 2 minutes it took for the things she'd read to settle into the same compartment as everything else she knew to be true about this place, rather than sitting separate from it, like something that hadn't been incorporated yet. Then she picked the folder back up and kept reading. By mid-morning, she had identified 3 facilities referenced in the operational documentation that didn't correspond to any registered Vought address she could cross-reference through public records. 2 of them were in New Jersey, 1 in Upper Manhattan. The Manhattan one was flagged in an internal memo dated 8 months prior as transitional holding, which the contextual language around it suggested meant people subjects in the documentation's preferred vocabulary who had been moved from one facility and not yet transferred to a permanent designation. She flagged that address. She did not tell Butcher she had flagged it. He called at 11 in the morning using the contact channel they'd established the night before, which she'd already decided was compromised in at least one direction she hadn't fully mapped yet. "Got something for you," he said. No preamble. One of our lads tracked a Vought transport making irregular runs up to a facility on 183rd. Medical supply cover, not medical supplies. "I know about the facility," she said. A pause that was slightly longer than it needed to be. "Right, you've been busy. Meet me there at 8, street level west side of the block." Another pause. "Karen, 8, she said, and ended the call. She spent the afternoon doing 3 things. She ran 2 aerial passes over the 183rd Street address at altitudes low enough for detailed observation, but high enough that she registered as weather anomaly, rather than a deliberate overflight on any instrumentation below. She mapped 4 entry points, a loading bay on the building's north face that showed thermal signatures consistent with active power, draw well above what the building's listed purpose required. And 6 people she could identify as security rather than staff by the way they moved and where they stood. She also confirmed through a combination of X-ray vision and listening to conversations 3 floors underground that there were 11 people in the basement level of that building who had not arrived voluntarily. 2 of them were children. At 7:45, she was on the west side of the block, standing in the shadow of a scaffolded repair project watching the street. At 7:59, Butcher arrived from the north on foot collar. Up, hands in his jacket pockets, moving the way men who had done field work for a long time moved. No wasted motion eyes on the middle distance. He stopped next to her, looked at the building, looked at her. "You already know the layout," he said. "Yes. And you're waiting for me anyway." "I'm waiting," she said, "because I want to watch how you handle this." He glanced at her sideways. Something moved behind his eyes that wasn't quite discomfort, more like a man deciding how much of his thinking to put into the open. "There's a transport due at this location in approximately 4 hours. Significant number of personnel. If we sit on this tonight and hit both the facility and the transport together, we get a much cleaner picture of the full supply chain. More evidence, more names." "There are children in that basement," she said. "I know. How long have you known?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the building instead, and she watched his jaw do the thing jaws did when someone was arranging language carefully. 48 hours. She turned and looked at him directly, and he met it because he was the kind of person who'd learned that looking away made things worse. His expression was not defiant. It was something closer to patient, the face of a man who had made a calculation and was waiting to explain the arithmetic. "The transport," he said, "carries documentation we can't get any other way. Personnel with names that don't appear in any of the files I already have. If we move tonight, the whole upper tier of this operation relocates within 24 hours and we're back to chasing crumbs. 48 hours more wasn't nothing. It was a window. To you," Karen said, "it was a window. To 2 children in a basement, it was 48 hours in a vault holding facility." "I know what it was." "Then say it plainly." He held her gaze. "I made a call. I thought the intelligence gain outweighed the delay. I've made calls like that before. I'll probably make them again." He said it the way someone reads back a ledger entry, not enjoying it, not particularly ashamed of it, just placing it on the table as a matter of record. No heat, no defensiveness, just the arithmetic laid out. Karen was quiet for 3 seconds, not thinking. She'd already thought, just letting the full weight of what he'd said land in the place where it belonged, next to everything else she now knew about this burrow and the things running underneath it. When she spoke, her voice had dropped a register, not louder, the opposite, the kind of quiet that Butcher apparently recognized, because something in his posture shifted very slightly, like a man who has just recalculated the distance between himself and a door. "We're going in now," she said. "You can do what you want with the transport." Karen, but she was already moving. The loading bay on the north face had a reinforced security door rated for considerable force. It held for approximately as long as it took her to apply meaningful pressure, which was not long at all. The 2 guards on the interior side of that door were trained, armed, and completely unprepared for what came through it. She put both of them down before either could get a transmission off pressure to the right nerve clusters fast enough that the whole thing was over before it registered as an engagement. The basement access was a stairwell behind a false wall panel that she located by sound. The echo quality was wrong on that section of the interior. The small difference that told her the space behind was larger than the one in front. She pulled the panel rather than pushed it because the hinge placement was visible if you knew where to look, and went down. The holding area was not what the clean documentary language of transitional holding had prepared her for. It rarely was. 4 adults and 2 children in separate locked sections of what had been built as a storage space and retrofitted with the minimum required to keep people alive and processable. Strip fluorescence, controlled temperature, a drain in the floor that served multiple purposes. The smell was disinfectant over something older, the specific combination that happened when you cleaned a space regularly, but couldn't clean out what the space had been used for. On the wall near the door, at about chest height for a standing adult, someone had scratched a series of marks into the paint, not letters, just marks. The kind made by people counting days when they've run out of better options. There were numbered tags on the door of each section. Not names. Numbers. She had the locks open. In under a minute she could hear the tumblers. Always had been able to the particular language of pins and springs. The two children were a girl of approximately 7 and a boy a few years older. The girl was holding a piece of paper folded into a rough animal shape, a crane or an attempt at one. The kind of thing a child makes when she has been given nothing and has decided to make something anyway. Neither of them spoke when the door opened. They looked at Karen with the particular stillness of children who have learned that reacting to new arrivals is a risk calculation, not a reflex. "You're leaving," she said. "Right now. Come with me." The boy looked at the girl. The girl looked at Karen, then looked at the folded paper in her hand, as if deciding whether it was worth carrying. She tucked it into her sleeve and stood up. The 4 adults were in varying states. One couldn't stand unassisted, which Karen handled by taking his weight against her side and moving, which was faster than negotiating alternatives. A second adult, a woman in her 40s, grabbed Karen's arm at the stairwell entrance and said something urgent and low that Karen caught as a warning. There was a third guard, one she hadn't accounted for, stationed on the upper landing rather than the ground level. Karen held up one finger, wait, went up 12 steps alone and came back down in approximately 4 seconds. The landing was clear. She got all 6 of them through the loading bay and out into the night air on the north side in 9 minutes. Butcher was waiting on the corner with a van she hadn't seen him arrive in, which meant he'd had it staged before the meeting, which meant he'd planned for a version of this evening where she didn't wait for the transport. She filed that away without commenting on it. He got the 6 people into the van with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done extractions before. The boy said something to him in a low voice as he climbed in. She caught it, 3 words. "Are you safe?" And Butcher answered in the same register, something short, and patted the boy's shoulder once with his whole hand in the blunt and slightly awkward way of a man not accustomed to comforting children. When the van doors were closed and his associate in the driver's seat had pulled away, Butcher turned back to Karen. "The transport's still coming," he said. 4 hours. "I heard you the first time. You're not going after it." "I'm going after all of it," she said. "On my timeline, not yours, and not coordinated around what you need for your evidence chain." He looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the basement of Fletcher Street, the appraising look, the one that was doing math. "You understand that if you start hitting facilities without a coordinated strategy, Vought relocates everything and we lose the chain. Then I'll move faster than they can relocate." He was quiet for a moment. "You can do that?" "Yes." "Right." He looked at the building. "So what do you need from me?" "Everything you have on the other 2 New Jersey facilities, tonight. And stay out of my operational decisions. You can give me information. You can tell me what you're planning. I'll tell you what I'm planning when it affects your safety or the people with you. Beyond that, you don't get to time this." Something passed across his face that was not quite respect and not quite resentment, somewhere in the territory between them, the look of a man recalibrating a position he'd been holding for a while. "The kids," he said. "The boy, he said something in there. I don't know the language. You catch it." She had. A dialect she recognized as a variant of something spoken in a specific region of South America where Vought had, according to page 208 of the files she'd read that morning, conducted a partnered program with a local medical foundation 3 years ago. The foundation had since been dissolved. "I caught it," she said. He nodded. He seemed to understand from her tone that she wasn't going to explain further. And she noted that he didn't push for it, that he had, in whatever blunt and compromised way he operated, something that functioned like discretion. "Files on the Jersey facilities," he said. "I'll have them to you within the hour." She didn't thank him. He didn't wait for her to. He walked back toward the building's east side, not toward any vehicles she could see. which meant he had another exit route she hadn't mapped, which meant he'd scouted this block more thoroughly than his entrance suggested. She added that to what she knew about him. She stayed on the north side of the building until she heard the basement level of it now empty, the overhead power draw already dimming as automated protocols wound down systems that were no longer needed to go fully quiet. Then she went up. From the air, the block looked like any other block. Restaurants, residential, a hardware store with its gate pulled down for the night. A bodega with the lights still on. People on the sidewalks doing what people did at this hour on any given street in this borough, moving between one place and another, not looking up. Below one of those unremarkable streets, a room that had held 11 people no longer held anyone. It was not a victory. She was not in the habit of calling things victories before she understood the full shape of what she was fighting. But it was a data point of a specific kind, the kind where you stop dealing in abstractions and start dealing in rooms you have actually walked through and faces you have actually seen. The boys questioned a butcher. 3 words. She thought about that as she rose above the roof lines, the grid of the borough below her, spreading outward in every direction, lit and loud and running its constant engine of movement. Somewhere in that grid were 2 more facilities. Somewhere in the documents Butcher was pulling together right now were the names of people who had authorized all of it, reviewed all of it, signed off on columns of outcomes and follow-up protocols and transitional holding designations. And somewhere in all of that, she'd seen the reference in a memo dated 11 months ago buried in a paragraph about resource reallocation and written around, rather than about the way you write around something you don't want to put in plain language, even in a document that isn't supposed to exist, was a location referred to only as the woods. The memo had not described what happened there. It had described the cost of what happened there in figures. And the cost had been large enough that whoever authorized it had flagged the expenditure as exceptional and non-recurring. The phrase sat in her memory like a stone at the bottom of still water. She didn't know yet what the woods was. What she knew was that everything she'd seen tonight, the numbered doors, the drain in the floor, the paper crane, the 48 hours Butcher had found acceptable, all of it was downstream of something. And the woods was upstream. The press conference lasted 19 minutes. Karen watched it from a bodega television 3 blocks from the Vought Media Center, standing near the refrigerated drinks section, with a bottle of water she hadn't opened, listening to the audio with the volume at a level the other customers couldn't hear, but she could. Ashley Barrett was not at the podium. The man who was had the bearing of someone positioned 3 steps below the room's actual power, which meant he'd been chosen specifically because he was disposable if the framing went wrong. He spoke for 12 of the 19 minutes about Vaught's commitment to transparent, superpowered governance, the importance of coordinated response protocols, and the legitimate public safety concerns raised by the recent incidents in Washington Heights and on the Upper West Side. He did not mention the 183rd Street location. He did not mention the 11 people who had been held there. He mentioned twice an independent oversight framework that Vought was proposing to Congress as a means of ensuring that all superpowered individuals operating within U.S. territory did so within an accountable structure. The framework had been filed as a draft bill 3 hours after Karen had extracted the last person from the numbered rooms on 183rd. She put the water bottle back and left. Vought was good. She'd known that since the first morning since the think piece that had gone live 25 minutes after Ashley's call. But there was a difference between good and this, between managing a story and pre-positioning legislation, before the story had even finished being managed. This was an apparatus with long anticipation built into it. They had not scrambled to draft that bill. They had drafted it earlier, held it ready, and found the right moment to drop it. That meant somewhere in the structure of this organization, someone was always watching for the moment that required it. She spent the morning tracing the bill's sponsoring senators through their public donor histories, cross-referencing campaign contributions, against the list of names she'd committed to memory from Butcher's records. The money didn't move cleanly. It moved through PAC vehicles with names like civic foundations and workforce initiative funds through consulting contracts that paid people who sat on boards that advised firms that received Vought infrastructure grants. 7 layers between the source and the senator in at least 2 cases. Exactly the kind of distance that made causality technically unprovable and functionally obvious. By 11, she had identified 7 points of direct financial overlap. By noon, she had a picture of how deeply the legislative scaffolding went. It went to the concrete. Her phone buzzed. Not Butcher's contact line, a different one, a number she didn't recognize that had still somehow gotten through the filtering she'd set. She answered without speaking. "I know you're not going to trust me right away," said the voice on the other end. Female, younger than she'd expected, with the specific flatness of someone who had practiced calm for so long. It had become structural. "That's fine. I just need you to turn on any news channel in the next 40 seconds. Karen turned. She was in front of a television window display at an electronics retailer on 52nd. The nearest screen showed a live news feed, and on it, Annie January in civilian clothes, standing in front of what appeared to be the main Vought Media Center lobby, holding her phone up to show a document to the cameras that had gathered around her in the last 30 seconds. The document, as far as Karen could read from the sidewalk at this distance, was an internal Vought communications brief. Subject line visible across the top: Narrative Control Washington Heights. Incident revised sequence. Annie was speaking into the microphones. Karen listened to the audio bleeding from the display window. This was written the morning after the incident, before any of the expert panels, before the oversight framework announcement. "I want people to understand that what you've been watching on television this week wasn't a response. It was a script. And the script was written by the same people who run the response teams that were staged for the cameras in the first place." 2 Vought security personnel appeared at the lobby doors behind her. They didn't move toward her immediately. Too many phones, too many lenses, but their position made it clear this was going to have a time limit. Someone in the press cluster shouted something at Annie that wasn't a question, more like an accusation with a rising inflection, and Karen caught the word "traitor" under the noise before it got swallowed by the general clamor. Karen was already walking toward the media center. She didn't run. She didn't need to. She covered the 3 blocks at a pace that looked unhurried to anyone watching, and arrived at the outer edge of the gathered press cluster just as the security team made its move, 2 of them stepping forward to bracket Annie from either side, with the professional courtesy of people removing an inconvenience. Karen put herself between them and Annie. She didn't say anything. She didn't touch the security personnel. She just stood there. And the specific quality of her standing there, the white bodysuit, the fact that she had recently been on 11 consecutive news cycles as a figure that trained Vought operatives could not move, was sufficient. The 2 security people stopped, looked at each other, made the calculation. They stepped back. Annie looked at Karen. Not with relief, not with gratitude, with the expression of someone who had committed to a course of action and was now calmly noting the conditions around it. "I was wondering if you'd show up," she said. "I was in the area," Karen said. The cameras were still running. Annie seemed to register that and deliberately turned back to face them. "I've uploaded copies of this document and 14 others to 3 separate servers. If you want to know who funded the oversight framework bill and why it was drafted 6 weeks ago, the links are in my public statement." She held up the phone one more time, then pocketed it. "We're done here." She turned and walked. Karen fell in beside her. They didn't speak for 2 blocks. Karen listened to the ambient audio behind them. Cameras' voices, one of the security team relaying a report into an earpiece, and tracked the shift in tone as Vought's communications infrastructure started processing what had just happened. It would take them approximately 4 minutes to decide on a response framing. It would take them another 10 to get it on air. That gave Annie and her approximately 14 minutes before the counter-narrative went live, and whatever credibility the document drop had built started being systematically dismantled. "They'll have a response in 14 minutes, Karen said. "I know. I've been watching them work for 3 years. Annie's voice was still flat, still controlled, but underneath the control, there was something that sounded like the last use of a resource that had been carefully rationed for a very long time. "They'll say the document is fabricated. They'll find a metadata inconsistency. There will be one, because they're good enough to plant one retroactively. By tonight, there'll be 3 credentialed experts on television explaining why the formatting proves it's fake. And the servers will be subpoenaed. The legal process will take longer than the news cycle." She stopped at a crosswalk and looked straight ahead at the "don't walk" signal. "I know how this works. I'm not doing it because I think I'm going to win this particular round." Karen looked at her sideways. "Then why?" "Because the document exists. And I'm the only person inside that building who knows where the others are. And if I sit on them until I've built a perfect case, I'll still be sitting on them when I'm 40. The light changed. She crossed. "Also because I'm very tired of watching things get managed." They walked another half block before Karen spoke again. "You knew they'd come for you in the lobby." "Yes." "You went anyway." "Yes." Karen didn't respond to that immediately. She turned it over the way she turned over most things, not with sentiment, but with attention, looking at it from different angles to find where it was structurally sound and where it might be concealing a fracture. Annie hadn't done it because she thought it would work. She hadn't done it for leverage or to impress anyone or to position herself as a sympathetic figure. She'd done it because the document existed and because not using it felt to her like participation in the thing she was refusing to participate in. That was the kind of logic that didn't leave much room for self-preservation. Karen had met very few people in a very long life who operated that way, sincerely rather than performatively. They were usually the most useful and the most fragile things in any given situation. "What do you have on the woods?" Karen said. Annie's step didn't break, but something in her posture shifted, a small tightening gone almost immediately. "You know about that. I've seen the name in 3 separate documents. Never with a description, only with cost figures." "Because nobody writes down what it is," Annie said. "Not in anything retrievable. What I know came from someone who worked intake there for 8 months before she stopped working anywhere." She said it without inflection, the way you state a fact you've already processed into something you can carry. "She's been gone 2 years. I don't know if it was them or if she just..." A small pause, not for effect, just the gap you leave when you're not sure how to finish a sentence cleanly. "I don't know. She told me this before. It's not a place for holding people. It's a place for deciding what a person becomes. Long-term, irreversible." Her jaw tightened for a moment, then released. "There are children there who went in before they were old enough to understand what consent meant and who will come out." She stopped, started again. "Who will come out as products." That's the word she used. Not subjects. Products. The street noise filled the gap she left after that. "How many?" Karen said. "My source said between 40 and 60 at any given time, rotating. The ones who develop the right abilities move through. The others..." She shook her head. "The cost figures you saw would account for the others." Karen was quiet for a moment. A cab blew past too fast for the conditions horn blaring at something 3 lanes over. "You burned your position in there today," Karen said. It wasn't a question. "I burned it a while ago. Today I just stopped pretending it wasn't burned." Annie looked at her for the first time since they'd started walking, a direct look, the kind that didn't ask for anything. I know you don't have a reason to trust me. I'm not asking you to. I'm telling you what I know because it's the most useful thing I can do right now, and I'm running out of things I can do. I know where one of the New Jersey sites is, Karen said. The second one. I'm going tonight. Something moved through Annie's expression. Not relief, not hope exactly, but something adjacent to both, filtered through the specific weariness of someone who had spent 3 years inside a building that turned everything bright into something managed. They'll have moved personnel after this morning, Annie said. New rotation, new protocols. It won't look the same as 183rd. I know, I'll adapt. I can get you the current rotation schedule. I still have access to 2 internal systems they haven't locked me out of yet. They'll get to it, but it takes them about 48 hours to process a full credential revoke after an incident like this morning. She said incident like this morning with the precise neutrality of a person describing a weather event. I can push it to you in the next hour. Karen looked at her. That's the last thing you get out of those systems before they close them. Probably. You're sure? Annie met her look steadily. If you're asking whether I know what I'm trading, yes. I know. A brief pause. Is that enough? Karen thought about the numbered doors, the drain in the floor, the paper crane, the cost figures described as exceptional and non-recurring. Send it to this number, she said, and gave Annie a contact string that connected to nothing traceable. Give me 40 minutes before you go anywhere crowded. Vaught's response team works faster when they're embarrassed. I've noticed. They parted at the corner. Karen didn't watch her go. She turned north and walked, and within 30 seconds, her mind was already on the New Jersey location. Entry points to personnel rotation timing. What adapt would mean in practice once she was on the ground. 40 seconds after they separated, Karen heard Annie's phone ping twice in quick succession. She was still close enough, half a block. Then a third time. Annie's footsteps slowed for a moment as she checked it, then resumed at a slightly different pace. Not faster. Just the gait of someone who has received information confirming something they already knew was coming. The credential revoke, Karen estimated, had started early. Behind her, somewhere in the tangle of broadcast frequencies, she tracked without thinking. She heard Ashley Barrett's voice cut through the midday noise, measured and warm and relentlessly professional. We are deeply concerned about the circulation of what appear to be fabricated internal documents. And we want to assure the public that our team is working with law enforcement to identify the source of this misinformation campaign. Karen kept walking. 14 minutes. She'd given them 14. They'd done it in 11. She revised her estimate of them upward and kept moving. They held it at Liberty Plaza. Of course they did. The sight lines were good, the symbolism was obvious, and the space could hold 12,000 standing spectators, while giving the camera positions on 3 elevated platforms a clean 270-degree arc of coverage. Somebody at Vaught had picked this venue with the same care that went into picking a court for a trial, where the verdict was already written. Not because it was the right place, but because it was the place that made the outcome look inevitable. Karen arrived 40 minutes early and stood on the south side of the plaza, in civilian clothes, watching the infrastructure go up. Broadcast cables ran in thick bundles across the stone pavers. 2 jumbotrons flanked the main stage, already cycling warm-up content montages of Homelander at disaster scenes, at medal ceremonies, at the kind of carefully lit moments that looked spontaneous because it cost a great deal of money to make them look that way. Sound technicians ran levels. A makeup artist stood near the back of the stage with a kit open. Red, white, and blue bunting hung from every available anchor point. Enough of it that the flags of several other countries technically present on the perimeter were barely visible. At 11:50, a VOT production coordinator with a headset and a clipboard moved through the press cordon and stopped near a knot of cameras on the west side. Karen listened. "We need to be clear on the framing," the coordinator said, her voice low and brisk. "This is not a confrontation. This is a dialogue about responsible power sharing in a complicated landscape. He leads with the cooperative language, she responds if she responds, and we cut to the reaction package if it goes longer than 3 minutes. Does everyone have the shot list?" Everyone had the shot list. Karen went to get coffee from a cart on the east side of the plaza that Annie had confirmed was not on any vendor contract she'd been able to find. She drank it standing up, watching the crowd fill in. The first arrivals were the committed ones. Homelander merchandise, handmade signs, the kind of early positioning that took real dedication or real emptiness. By 12:15, the plaza was at capacity, and the overflow stretched down 2 side streets, people standing on benches and car hoods for line of sight to the jumbotrons. She finished the coffee, dropped the cup, and walked to the stage. The security cordon parted for her. Not willingly, and not immediately. There was a moment where 4 very large people in tactical gear looked at each other, and then at her, and then at the crowd behind her, and did the math. She didn't help them with the math. She just stood at the edge of the cordon until the calculation completed on its own. She went up the stage steps and stood at the far end of the platform, away from the podium, away from the camera sweet spots. She wasn't there to use the equipment. She crossed her arms and waited. Homelander arrived from the opposite side 3 minutes later. Whatever she had expected, and she had run several versions of this encounter during the preceding 48 hours, it wasn't quite what walked onto that stage. The photographs hadn't been wrong about him. Tall, broad, the suit immaculate, the hair catching the midday light exactly the way hair caught light in professionally shot portraits. But there was something in the way he moved that the photographs hadn't captured, a quality of ownership, of a man crossing a room that he had always been certain was his. It radiated from him the way heat radiated from a surface that had been in sunlight for a long time. He crossed the stage toward the podium and midway stopped. He looked at her. She looked back. He recovered in under a second, she'd been counting, and moved to the podium with the easy authority of a man who had learned early that hesitation was something you simply didn't display in public. He took the microphone. The crowd responded to his presence the way crowds responded to very famous things, a sound that wasn't quite words, a collective exhale of recognition. "Thank you all for being here." The voice was warm, calibrated, carrying the particular resonance of someone who had been doing this for years. "I asked for this conversation because I think we owe it to each other, to the people of this country, to talk openly about what the presence of a new and unaccountable powered individual means for all of us." He turned his head toward Karen, not facing her fully, a quarter turn, the kind that let the cameras get both of them in frame while giving the impression of direct engagement. "I want to start by saying that I have no hostility here. What I have is concern. Because power without accountability isn't safety. It's a threat waiting to become a disaster." The crowd gave him back what he needed. Karen waited for a pause in the applause. When it came, she spoke across the stage at a volume that didn't require the microphone. "You counted." Homelander's expression moved, very slightly. "I'm sorry. The clip from Washington Heights. You watched it 6 times, and on the 6th pass, you were looking for something specific." She let it sit for a moment. "You were counting whether I looked at the camera?" The production coordinator's stage left was already pressing her earpiece. The crowd had gone to an uncertain murmur, not hostile yet, not understanding yet. Just the sound of 12,000 people realizing the script had jumped a page. Homelander smiled. The smile was good. It had been built over years of practice, and it was still very good. I think the public deserves a straightforward answer, he said. Are you willing to operate within a framework that ensures? No, Karen said. He blinked, one beat. The question, he said with slightly more edge underneath the warmth though, is about accountability. About the fact that unregistered. The question you're actually asking, Karen said, is whether I'll agree to be defined by you. Whether I'll accept that you get to set the terms of what I'm allowed to be in this city. She uncrossed her arms. I won't. I'm not here because you invited me. I'm here because you made it difficult to ignore you. There's a difference. The murmur in the crowd shifted register. Homelander stepped away from the podium. Still controlled, she gave him that. He moved toward the center of the stage with the unhurried confidence of someone who believed he was about to regain the ground. The people here, he said, gesturing toward the crowd with a practiced open hand. They need to know who's keeping them safe. They need to know the person standing in front of them answers to someone, to something. That there are rules. There are, Karen said. You're breaking most of them. Silence. Not the polite kind. Then someone in the crowd shouted something that got absorbed immediately into ambient noise. And someone else tried to start a chant that didn't catch. And a woman near the front dropped her sign because she'd forgotten she was holding it. Homelander was looking at Karen with an expression she recognized, now having watched the clip of him enough times to know his faces. This was the one that came just before the other ones stopped being faces. His jaw was set. His eyes had a quality that reminded her incongruously of a pressure gauge approaching its maximum reading. You don't get to come into my country, he said, his voice very level now, and stand on my stage and tell 12,000 people that I'm the problem. I didn't tell them anything, Karen said. I asked you a question in front of witnesses, and you spent 4 minutes not answering it. On the jumbotrons, she could see her own face. Distant, unhurried arms loose at her sides, and beside it, in the split screen, the broadcast team was apparently still running despite what the production coordinator's earpiece was clearly telling her to do, Homelander's face, which was doing something the montage footage had never shown it doing. He fired. The heat vision came out at full output, she could tell, because there was no build, no warning pulse, just the beam at maximum intensity, the kind he used when he wasn't thinking about collateral. It hit her in the chest, and she felt it as warmth, approximately the warmth of standing close to a campfire. Not unpleasant. She didn't move. The crowd's sound was unlike anything she'd heard in 12,000 people at once. It wasn't screaming, not yet. It was something that preceded screaming, the collective intake of breath from a species that had just seen its threat model fail in real time. Homelander had stopped firing. His expression was gone. What was under it was something he'd been keeping below the floor of himself for a very long time, and it had just come through. He crossed the stage in under a second, the speed making him a blur to the crowd, and hit her with his full strength at center mass. She stepped into it. The impact transferred into the stage beneath them. The reinforced aluminum framing sheared the platform, buckled outward in a 3-meter radius, and the sound it made was the sound of something large and structural deciding it was done. She had moved 6 inches. He had moved the stage. She reached out, got a grip on his forearm before he could reset, and redirected the momentum he was still carrying into a direction he hadn't chosen. He went through the left jumbotron support structure, through the bunting, through the temporary barrier on the stage's north edge, and came to rest against the concrete planter that marked the boundary of the plaza proper. The planter held. He left a visible impression in it. People ran. Not all of them, a significant portion of 12,000 stood frozen, phones raised, recording a thing their nervous systems hadn't finished classifying yet. The woman who had dropped her sign picked it up again, and then put it down again. 3 press cameras were still rolling on fixed mounts untended, capturing whatever they were aimed at. Near the North Barrier, a man in a Homelander jersey was still filming. Not running, shouting something into his phone that sounded like commentary tone bright. Excited, the voice of someone who had decided this was content before he decided what it was. Karen walked to the edge of the broken platform and looked at where Homelander was already rising from the debris, fast the healing. Working on whatever the impact had cost him, getting to vertical with the hard insistence of someone for whom staying down was not a category that existed. His suit had shredded at the left shoulder and across the chest where the planter's edge had caught him. His face was intact, which was almost worse. Nothing to point to, no blood, no mark, just the expression of a man who had thrown everything available at a problem and watched it not work. He looked at her across the 30 feet of wreckage. She looked back. "You're done here," she said. Not loudly. "Go." He didn't go. But he didn't come at her again either. He hovered literally, rising 2 feet off the ground in the way that had probably once read as godlike, and now read as a man who needed the height because the ground had become unreliable, and stared at her with an expression that had shed all its manufactured components and was now just the raw material underneath. Then, the Vought helicopter that had been circling at altitude since the beginning of the event dropped to building height and held position off his left shoulder, visible to everyone as a very obvious exit that was being offered to him. He took it. He rose into the sky without another word, and the cameras tracked him until he was a point and then nothing, and the plaza was left with the wreckage of the stage and 12,000 people who were now in possession of footage that no amount of broadcast delay or feed interruption was going to fully contain, because 300 phones had been recording simultaneously, and the upload had started before the platform had finished buckling. In the production truck parked behind the press cordon, Karen could hear without straining a room of people trying to generate coherent sentences and mostly failing. She heard Ashley Barrett's voice among them, clear and steady. Even under the pressure, Ashley was very good, saying, "We need the alternative cut in 20 minutes. We need the eyewitness, discrediting package, ready for tonight, and I need legal on the phone right now about the raw footage situation." The raw footage situation, Karen reflected, was going to be somewhat difficult to manage. She stepped down from the wreckage of the platform and walked south through the crowd which parted around her in the uncertain, involuntary way of people who were still processing whether what they'd seen was real. No one said anything to her directly. A few people held their phones up, recording her passage, and she didn't acknowledge them. Annie was at the south entrance, leaning against a concrete pillar, with her jacket pulled up against the wind, off the river, watching the dispersing crowd with the particular attention of someone cataloging damage rather than spectating it. "How'd the production coordinator take it?" Annie said. "She had a very long day," Karen said. Annie almost smiled. Not quite. "Ashley's going to be on television in 40 minutes, calling it a security incident caused by an unregistered foreign national. She's probably already written the chyron." She pushed off the pillar and fell into step. "It won't hold for long, but it'll hold long enough for them to move things." They walked together toward the river without discussing the wreckage or the helicopter or what Homelander's face had done in the moment after the heat vision made contact and accomplished nothing. There was nothing to say about any of that, which the raw feed wouldn't do more efficiently once it finished spreading. What Karen was thinking about, what she'd been turning toward since before she'd arrived at the plaza, was simpler and more urgent. Every asset Vought could move, they were moving right now. Every conversation that existed only in spoken words was being had right now. Every location that appeared in a digital record was being scrubbed or relocated within the next 12 hours because whoever sat at the top of that structure had watched what happened in Liberty Plaza and drawn the same conclusion she had. Hitting Homelander wasn't enough. She'd known that before she set foot on the platform. "I need your help," she said. Annie didn't look surprised. What kind? The kind where you tell me what they move first when they think the whole thing is coming down. Annie was quiet for half a block looking at the river. Then, the research. Not the product, the originals. The proof of what they built and how. They'll move that before anything else because without it, the rest is just a bad PR story. A pause. There's a location. Off-grid, off-book. I've only heard it mentioned twice in 3 years and never with an address, but I think I know someone who might know where it is. She said it carefully, the way you say the name of something you've been careful not to say out loud too often. The woods, Karen said. Annie stopped walking. Yes, she said. The river moved. Somewhere behind them, 12,000 people were learning what it felt like when the architecture of certainty developed visible cracks. Then that's where we start, Karen said. She started with the people. Not the data, not the supply lines, not the command nodes she'd spent 2 nights mapping. The people first, because if she hit infrastructure while Vought still had warm bodies in numbered rooms, the first thing the apparatus would do was burn the evidence it was standing on. The holding site in Greenpoint went at 11:04 p.m. 6 people inside, 2 guards who made the calculation correctly and put their hands up before she'd fully come through the wall. She pulled the 6 out, set the guards outside on the sidewalk, zip-tied to a streetlight, humiliating, not fatal, and called Butcher's extraction line before the dust from the entry point had settled. Butcher picked up on the second ring. "Greenpoint's clear," she said. 6. 1 needs medical. Van's 4 minutes out. A pause, she could hear him recalibrating the sound of a man running numbers. "You hit the Sunset Park unit yet?" "Next. There's a 3rd one. Just got confirmation 20 minutes ago. Red Hook below the overpass. 2 people, not 6. Vought was moving them out tonight. They might already be gone." "Address." He gave it. Then, "You're going fast." "I know," she said, and ended the call. Sunset Park took 3 minutes. 4 people, 1 guard who tried to use his radio and found the frequencies jammed before he'd finished the first syllable. She left him locked in the room he'd been using as an office. The door handle removed the people he'd been guarding, standing on the sidewalk outside trying to understand what had happened to the air. Red Hook was the one Butcher had flagged as possibly already gone. It wasn't gone. It was in the process of going a single vehicle outside engine running the 2 people inside, already loaded and ready to disappear into whatever the next phase of Vaught's shuffle protocol called for. Karen put the vehicle down onto the pavement by its roof, gently enough to disable it without crushing the occupants, and had the 2 people out and the driver restrained before the engine had finished stuttering out. 11 people. 41 minutes. 3 sites that no longer existed as operational points. She called Butcher. "Red Hook's clear," she said. "All 3 done. What's moving?" "Everything," he said. "They know you started." 3 convoys redirected in the last 20 minutes. 2 labs in the process of lockdown. Their burning files at the Newark Relay and the Long Island City unit just went dark on all external comms. His voice had a quality she hadn't heard in it before, something between professional respect and the very specific unease of a man watching a plan exceed the boundaries of the plan. "They're also pushing something through the media pipeline. Mass disturbance framing, starting to call it a superpowered terror event." "They can call it whatever they want," Karen said. "The Newark Relay. Give me the address." "Already sent it." A beat. "You're going to hit the command nodes too?" "Yes." "In what order?" "My order," she said. "Not yours." He didn't argue. She was already gone. The Newark Relay was the one she wanted most. After the people, not because it held the most material, but because it was the point through which the most signals passed. Take out a hub and the things that fed it rerouted. Take out the relay and the rerouting itself became visible because everything scrambling to find a new path would light up against the background silence. She hit it at 11:58. The lockdown was already partially engaged. 2 fire doors down the main server room sealed 3 people inside, who had clearly been told to stay at their posts. She took the fire doors off their hinges, set the 3 people outside, and spent 4 minutes inside the server room. With the intake records from Maspeth cross-referenced against the node addresses, she'd spent 48 hours tracking. She didn't destroy the servers. She copied the routing tables onto a drive Butcher had provided. She hated using his hardware, had checked it 3 times for trackers, and then she destroyed the servers. The lights across the relay structure went dark in sequence, like a sound dying from the far end of a room. On her way out, her phone buzzed. Annie. They just internally flagged the woods for accelerated closure protocol. That means they're going to start moving the research. You have maybe 6 hours before it disappears into off-site dark storage. Karen read it while she was already airborne over the Jersey Turnpike. The data drive I have from Newark, can you cross-reference it for the Woods node? 3 minutes. Then, yes. Sending coordinates. Karen, there are 43 names on the current active roster. 43. She held that number for exactly as long as it took her to bank east toward the coordinates. The Long Island City unit had gone dark because it was being emptied, not because it was already empty. She arrived to find a loading operation in progress, 2 vehicles being packed with crates. From a sub-level, she hadn't known about 4 workers and a supervisor who was on the phone with someone who was clearly telling him to go faster. She landed in the middle of the loading bay. The supervisor stopped talking. "The crates stay," Karen said. "The people leave." The supervisor looked at the crates, then at her, then did the math that every Vought employee who had survived this long was apparently capable of doing in under 3 seconds. He put the phone down. "Move," she told the workers. They moved. She pulled the crates back into the sub-level, all 14 of them, in 2 trips, and spent 6 minutes confirming their contents against the manifest she'd photographed from the Newark routing tables, research materials, compound 5 derivatives in cold containers. A secondary set of intake records that matched the format she'd found in Maspeth, but covered a different cohort, different dates. She left the sub-level, sealed sent Butcher the address for evidence extraction, and was back in the air at 12:43. The first soup showed up at 12:51. He was fast, genuinely fast, not the kind of fast that just looked impressive on television, and he came at her from the south, while she was over the Pulaski Bridge, hitting her at what was probably his maximum velocity. The impact would have reduced most things to component parts. She caught his wrist, redirected his momentum into a controlled arc, and set him down on the bridge's pedestrian walkway without enough force to kill him. He lay there for a moment processing what had happened to the physics he thought he knew. She left him there and continued north. 2 more came in the following 40 minutes. One with a strength set in the range she'd seen from the 7 secondary members. She put him down in under 10 seconds outside the Astoria relay she was dismantling. The other had some kind of concussive projection that was genuinely dangerous to the buildings around them. She absorbed the first discharge, closed the distance before the second could charge, and ended it with minimal property damage. Minimal, not none. Butcher called while she was still clearing the Astoria debris. "I'm hearing chatter on Vaught's emergency line," he said. "They're activating something. Not the 7, something older. Something they've been holding as a last card." She already knew what it was. The name had appeared twice in the routing tables, in a section of the Newark relay she'd cross-referenced last to contingency designations, flagged as deployable only when standard assets were insufficient and collateral constraints were suspended. "Soldier boy," she said. "Yeah." Butcher's voice had gone very flat. He's already in Manhattan. They dropped him into Hell's Kitchen about 4 minutes ago. Karen. An unusual hesitation coming from a man who didn't hesitate easily. He doesn't care about the buildings. She was already moving before he finished the sentence. She smelled the blast radius before she saw it thermal, scorching on a scale that a gas explosion couldn't account for the specific chemical signature of compound 5 combustion interacting with structural concrete. One building on the south block had lost its entire eastern face. 2 cars on the street below were on their sides. The people on the block were running, which meant the people on the block were still able to run, which was the first useful data point. Soldier Boy was in the street. He looked like he'd been in there for a while. Coat-torn expression of a man who had found something to hit and was proceeding to hit it regardless of what else was in the vicinity. 2 more people were still in the damaged building. She could hear them, 3rd floor, 1 mobile, 1 not. She made a decision in under 1 second. She went for the building first. It took 90 seconds in through the 3rd floor window, locate the 2 people, assess the mobile one as capable of movement, carry the other, bring them both to the street. She set them down near the corner, got a block of distance between them and the active zone, and turned back. Soldier Boy had used the 90 seconds to produce a second blast, smaller, against the building across the street. He saw her coming and oriented. "There you are," he said with the satisfied tone of someone who had been promised a fight and was about to collect. She hit him at the full velocity she'd held back from the 3 soups earlier. He went through the street, not through a building. She'd angled it away from the occupied structures and came to rest against a fire hydrant in the intersection, which detonated on impact and added to the general chaos of the block without adding to the casualties. He got up. She'd expected that. He charged the next radiation blast. She could see the buildup in his chest cavity, the particular luminescence of a compound 5, derived cellular reaction approaching discharge. She covered the distance between them. Before the charge reached critical, grabbed the arm before the direction could lock and put him into the asphalt, face first, with enough force to make the decision for him. He stopped getting up. She stood over him for a moment. The street was soaked from the hydrant. Someone 2 blocks up was filming from a fire escape, the phone glow faint in the post-blast haze. She turned away from the phone and walked. Yask. By 2:30, AM VOT's internal network, or what remained of it, had gone from controlled emergency protocols to something that sounded on the frequencies she'd been monitoring like a large and complicated animal trying to locate its own spine. The command nodes were down. The relay structure was severed at 4 of its 7 junction points. The supply lines for Compound 5 production had been interrupted at 2 key points in the chain. The research from Long Island City was in Butcher's people's hands. The intake records from Maspeth and its secondary cohort were secured. 11 people were out of numbered rooms and into whatever came next. Soldier Boy was in federal custody, delivered to an address Butcher had specified. Karen had opinions about what Butcher would do with that arrangement, but that was a problem that belonged to tomorrow. Annie called at 2:41. "I'm watching their internal communications collapse in real time," she said. Her voice had an odd quality to it, not joy, not relief. Something closer to the feeling of finally exhaling after holding a breath for 3 years. "They're trying to spin it. They're going to say it was coordinated domestic terrorism, that you're a foreign weapon, that the research you took was proprietary medical data." A pause. "They'll get some traction with that." "Not enough." "No," Karen agreed. "What happens now?" Karen looked out over the city, not from a rooftop, not performing anything, just moving at altitude through the pre-dawn dark with the drive from Newark in her pocket, and the shape of what remained ahead of her very clear in her mind. "Homelander still has people to you," she said. "And he's not going to try to hold the line anymore. He's going to go at whatever he thinks will hurt the most." Annie was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful. "Ryan," she said. "Yes." "He'll use him as what? A shield? A weapon?" "Both," Karen said. "He'll use him as both." Below, the first ambulances were arriving at Hell's Kitchen. The city was doing what cities did, absorbing the night's violence into its infrastructure, processing it, continuing. Somewhere in it, Homelander was watching the same skyline and arriving at the same conclusion she had from the opposite direction. "Get somewhere safe," Karen told Annie. "Not a Vought property. Not anywhere you've used in the last week." "I know. Annie." She said it once, not as a preamble to something longer, just as a marker. "What you did, it mattered. The records we have now exist because of what you started." Annie didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was level but not quite steady. "Go finish it," she said. The line went quiet. Somewhere across the city, a phone was ringing in a very tall building, and the man who answered it was going to make a decision that would determine how the next 12 hours ended. Karen turned toward the tower and flew. The feeds were still running at dawn. Not the official ones, those had gone to emergency holding screens, generic blue, the corporate equivalent of a hand over a wound. But the raw uploads were everywhere. Clips of the Long Island City loading bay, the Greenpoint Street with the zip-tied guards, the Hell's Kitchen block with the building face gone. Soldier Boy's arrest, the Newark relay going dark in sequence. 17 separate angles on the Liberty Plaza wreckage that had been filmed the week before and were now being re-watched in the context of everything that had come after. By 6 in the morning, 3 Vought board members had issued statements. None of the statements mentioned Homelander. All of them mentioned stability, continuity, and the importance of accountability frameworks going forward. 2 of them were lawyers. Ashley Barrett had not issued a statement. Karen read all of it in 40 seconds, skimming the feeds while she sat on a water tower in the Bronx, watching the sun come up and waiting for a phone call that she knew was going to come before the light got much higher. It came at 6:14. Not from Butcher, not from Annie. The number was a Vought internal line that had somehow obtained her contact string, which meant either someone at Vought had traded it for something, or they'd had it for longer than she'd known about and had been waiting for the right moment to use it. She answered. The voice on the other end wasn't Ashley. "I thought you should know." The voice said male middle management, the particular tone of someone who had decided this call was the least bad option remaining. That he took the boy this morning, around 4 a.m. We don't know where. "Ryan," Karen said. "Yes." "Why are you telling me?" A pause that had the texture of a man who had spent a long time inside something and was now very late choosing a different side. "Because of what's in those intake records," he said. "And because I have a daughter who's 8. She ended the call and was airborne before the phone had finished closing. She found them by sound, not radio, not frequency scanning, just the particular acoustic signature of a man who had stopped trying to be quiet. Homelander was in the air over the East River, somewhere between the bridges, and he was talking. Not to Ryan, not into any device, just talking the way people talked when the audience they needed had collapsed, and they hadn't yet accepted that the collapse was permanent. Ryan was on the walkway of the lower bridge span, sitting, not standing, that told her something. Sitting meant he hadn't been ordered there, or the order had already broken against whatever Ryan had decided was a limit. She came in level with the bridge deck and landed 30 feet from the boy. He looked at her. He was 12, maybe 13, and he had his father's eyes and his mother's terror, and something underneath both of those things that was purely his own. A wariness that looked less like a child's fear and more like a person who had spent his whole life inside a very loud room, trying to figure out which sounds were real. "You're her," he said. "Yes," she said. She didn't close the remaining distance. She let him have the 30 feet. Ryan glanced up. He said if I moved, He said things would get worse. He swallowed. Are things going to get worse? Not for you, Karen said. Not from me. He looked at her for a long moment, measuring it, the way kids measured things when they'd learned early that adults promised what they could not deliver. Then something in his face shifted. Not relief, not trust, just the first thin edge of a decision being made. Okay, he said. Homelander came down fast and without announcement, which told her he'd heard the exchange and had decided that 2 words from her carried more weight than anything he'd said in the last 3 hours. He landed between her and Ryan. He looked, she noted at once, without dwelling, like a man who had shed the last 30 pounds of performance. No smile, no calibrated warmth. The face under all of that had been waiting for a long time to come out, and it had come out ugly, the way things came out ugly when they'd been compressed too long. You're not taking him, he said. I'm not taking anyone, Karen said. That's the difference between us. His jaw tightened. He's my son. He's a person, Karen said. You don't own people. You don't know anything about Ryan. She said it without raising her voice, still looking at Homelander. Walk north on the walkway. Don't stop until you're off the bridge. She heard him stand, heard the footsteps begin hesitant, then steadier. Homelander's eyes went to the boys retreating back, and what crossed his face in that moment wasn't anger. It was something older and more exposed, the look of a thing that had built its entire existence around being the most important object in every room it entered. Watching a room choose something else. He hit her. Full strength, no build-up, the kind of strike that came from a body that had given up on tactics and gone back to the first thing it had ever known worked. She took it across the jaw and let it move her 3 feet to the left, no more. The railing behind her held. She hit him back once with her right hand, pulling enough of the force that he stayed on the bridge rather than going through it. He went into the steel walkway face down and came up with the paint scraped off half the suit's chest plate and an expression that had finally completely run out of anything to put on top of it. That's all you have, he said. It wasn't a question. It was the last thing a man said when he was trying to make the ground feel solid again. No, she said. That's what I'm choosing. He came at her again. Heat vision first this time, a sustained discharge that lit the bridge deck orange and accomplished the same thing the Liberty Plaza beam had accomplished, which was nothing she needed to protect herself from. She walked into it, through it, and hit him in the sternum with enough force to fold him backward over the railing. She caught his collar before he cleared the railing, held him there, his back arched over the edge, the river 130 feet below, the burning bridge deck behind her, the dawn coming up over the water in the east. He was breathing hard. His hands came up to her wrist, not to break the grip, just the involuntary reach of a body, looking for something to hold on to. She looked at him. Not with anger, not with satisfaction. With the specific attention of someone finishing a task that had needed to be finished for a long time. You want me to say something? He said. His voice had come down to almost nothing. No, she said. She pulled him back over the railing, spun once and threw him. Not into the river. West toward the island, toward the avenue that ran along the waterfront toward the block where Vought Tower still stood. Glassed and dark at this hour, the logo on its face visible from the bridge. He hit the plaza in front of it. The impact was sufficient. She didn't follow him down. She gave it 3 seconds, long enough to confirm he wasn't getting up long enough for the 6 phones she could already hear recording from the nearby streets to capture what they needed to capture. And then she turned. Ryan was still on the bridge. He'd stopped walking. I told you to keep going, she said. I know. He was looking at the tower, at the place where his father had landed. Is he? Yes. The boy was quiet for a moment. The river moved below them. Somewhere up the block, a car alarm had been triggered by the impact and was cycling through its sequence. He wasn't going to stop, Ryan said. Not as a question, not looking for reassurance. No, Karen said. I know. He said it in the voice of someone who had known it for a long time and had spent a long time hoping to be wrong. I've known. She looked at him. He was 12 or 13, and he had just watched his father die in front of a building that had manufactured his father, and he was still standing up, and he was not as far as she could determine going to fall apart right now. That wasn't strength or maturity. It was just the specific quality of a person who had survived a great deal of compression and had more tensile integrity than the force applied to them. There are people who will want to be responsible for you now, she said. Some of them will want that for your sake. Some of them will want it for what you can do. You'll have to figure out the difference. He looked at her. How do you tell the ones who want you for what you can do? She said. We'll never ask what you want. He thought about that. Then, with the cautious economy of someone who had learned not to spend trust easily, what do you want? Nothing from you, Karen said. That's the whole answer. He nodded slowly, once. In the distance, sirens. Multiple, the kind of convergence that happened when a city's emergency infrastructure registered something it didn't have a category for. Someone will come, she said. Annie January, if she gets here first. She's one of the ones doing it for your sake. And Butcher. She looked at him. How do you know that name? My dad talked about him. A pause. Not nicely. Butcher is someone who does things for his own reasons, she said. His reasons and your interests will overlap sometimes, not always. Don't let him tell you they're the same thing. The boy absorbed that with the quiet efficiency of someone filing it somewhere it would keep. Okay, he said again. Same word as before, but it meant something different now. She stepped up onto the railing. Wait. He said it fast before he decided to say it. Are you going to come back to this to hear? She looked at him once more. 12 or 13 standing on a bridge in the wreckage of the first world he'd known, asking the question children asked when the thing protecting them had just left the room. I don't think so, she said. She left before he could ask another one. The city below her was already doing what it did, processing, absorbing, generating takes. The feeds had broken from holding screens back to live coverage. And the live coverage was a cascading argument about what had happened and who was responsible and what came next. And whether Karen was a savior or a threat or a foreign government asset or proof that the Vought model had been broken all along. Everyone had a frame. The frames were incompatible. By nightfall, there would be congressional hearings announced, and 3 major anchors would have contradicted themselves within the same broadcast. She watched it for a moment, from altitude, the way you watched something that was going to take a very long time to resolve and that you had done what you could with. Then she turned away from the city, not toward anything in particular, not toward a home that existed here just away, and let the speed build underneath her until the skyline was behind her and the open Atlantic was ahead, and the only sound was the wind. Her phone buzzed once. Annie, he's gone. She typed back. Yes, 3 seconds. The records are with 3 separate legal teams and 2 journalists who aren't afraid of Vought anymore. Whatever's left of Vought is going to spend a long time in rooms they don't control. A pause in the typing, then. Thank you. Karen looked at the message for a moment. The water below her was gray-green and very large and entirely indifferent to what had happened in the city behind her, which was the correct attitude for water to have. She put the phone away without answering. There was nothing to say that the work hadn't already said. The Atlantic opened ahead of her, and she flew into it, and the city with all its wreckage and its ongoing arguments and its 12-year-old boy standing on a bridge trying to figure out what came next receded behind her until it was a line and then a suggestion and then nothing at all.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss our future videos. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.